Arthur Stone sat on a creaky bentwood chair and stared out the window. Outside was October, not the golden, bountiful kind pictured on calendars, but a provincial backwater October, grey as a soldier's worn overcoat, damp as a weeping widow, and endless as a conversation with oneself in an empty room. The room suited the October gloom, walls papered in faded, dainty, depressing little flowers that seemed to have absorbed all the sighs of previous tenants. An iron bed with a sagging mesh spring covered by a government issue blanket, and the chair he sat on. That was the sum of his possessions, if you didn't count the old suitcase in the corner, stuffed not so much with clothes as with the past life he'd fled, as if chased by all the demons of hell. He'd been here in this nameless town of Ashwood for 3 months now. 3 months of waking to the blast of the morning train whistle, drinking instant coffee from a chipped mug the landlady gave him, and heading to work. The work suited the place to handyman at the local building supply warehouse. Arthur Stone, with his architect's degree, his almost assured future in his future father-in-law's big design firm, now hauled sacks of cement and loaded bundles of shingles. There was something humiliating yet cleansing about it, like a cold shower after a brutal hangover. His hands, accustomed to pencils and drafting tables, had grown rough, covered in calluses and scrapes. He'd lost weight, grown gaunt. His eyes held the calm weariness of people who do heavy physical labor and think little about lofty things. But that was a lie. He thought constantly. Thoughts like persistent autumn flies buzzed in his head, giving him no peace day or night. He kept returning to that evening that had snapped his life in half like a dry twig. 3 weeks until the wedding, 3 weeks until his life was supposed to settle permanently onto its preordained smooth track. Beautiful fiancée, Lydia. An apartment downtown, a gift from her parents, a prestigious job under the wing of her father, a powerful man in the construction business. Everything was neatly arranged, mapped out for years ahead. Arthur, an orphan from a humble background, had hit the jackpot. That's what everyone said. That's what he'd thought too. He loved Lydia, or thought he did. She was like a dream stepped off a glossy magazine cover. Perfect figure, perfect smile, perfect manners. She said the right things, wore elegant clothes. Her laugh was like the chime of silver bells. She was a work of art he'd been lucky enough to acquire. Sometimes, though, a strange feeling would grip him, as if he wasn't talking to a real person, but a flawlessly executed copy. Her reactions were too calculated, too precise, as if she'd taken a special course on how to be the perfect fiancée and wife. But he pushed those thoughts away. He was happy. People told him he was happy, and he believed them. That evening started completely normally. Lydia went off to a friend's place for her bachelorette party. Private party, just us girls, honey. You won't miss me too much, will you? She cooed into the phone. He hadn't planned to. He had a pile of minor repairs to do in their future apartment. He was fiddling with an outlet when Vinny, an old college buddy, called. Vinny was one of those perpetual students who scraped by on odd jobs but always landed in the middle of the most interesting happenings. Artie, hey, you busy? Listen. I'm DJing at this killer party, out of town, at some trust fund kid's mansion. Crowds all trust fund babies. My helper bailed. Help a guy out? Just man the booth while I step away, push some buttons. I'll pay you, and you can hang out, see how the other half lives. Arthur didn't feel like going anywhere. But Vinny was persistent, and it felt awkward to refuse an old friend. Besides, the thought of a distraction didn't seem so bad. He changed quickly, and an hour later was in a cab with Vinny heading out of town. The mansion was huge, glass-fronted, glowing in the night like a spaceship. Music pounded so hard the ground vibrated. Inside was a sea of people, expensive drinks and thick hookah smoke. Vinny led him to the DJ booth, hastily explained the basics, and vanished into the crowd. Arthur felt like an alien at this celebration of life. He mechanically pushed buttons, changing tracks, and watched the dancers distantly. All these pampered, self-assured people seemed like characters from another world. Girls in revealing outfits laughing too loudly, guys with lazy, jaded stares. And then he saw her. Lydia. She stood in the center of a small group by the terrace pool. She didn't see him. The DJ booth was in shadow, and he was hidden behind the equipment. His heart plummeted. Bachelorette party? Just girls? Standing next to her was a tall blonde guy in a silk shirt unbuttoned to his chest, talking animatedly, his hand familiarly resting on her waist. But that wasn't what shocked Arthur, not even that Lydia had lied to him. He saw her face. It was the face of a complete stranger. The same perfect features, but the expression... predatory, cynical, cruel. She was laughing, but it wasn't her silver bell chime. It was a sharp, cawing laugh. She was smoking, exhaling smoke in thin, nervous streams. He'd never seen her with a cigarette. "Ugh, that's so vulgar," she always said. The group she was with was loudly discussing someone. Arthur couldn't hear everything over the music's roar, but fragments of phrases reached him, and those fragments were like slaps. "That architect of hers," some girl was saying, nodding towards Lydia. "Does he even know who he's tangled with?" Lydia smiled predatorily. A smile Arthur had never seen. There wasn't a drop of warmth in it. "Honey? Oh, don't make me laugh. He's so proper. Nauseatingly so. Looks at me like I'm an icon. Thinks I'm an angel incarnate. It's almost funny. Daddy said necessary. Good boy. Promising. Obedient. He'll sit in the office, draw his little blueprints, and be thrilled he's allowed to breathe near me." The blonde guy laughed and pulled her closer. "He's not jealous? What if he finds out his angel isn't so saintly?" Lydia shrugged, and the gesture held such cold contempt that Arthur's blood froze. "Where's he gonna go? Jump ship? He's flat broke. Without me, without Daddy, he's nobody. A zero. He'll do what he's told. Sweet, tame, house-trained architect." She spat the word architect as if talking about a shameful disease. The whole group burst out laughing. Then the blonde guy kissed her. Long, greedily, not like a fiancé kisses his bride, but like an owner claiming his property. And she responded with the same hungry passion. Arthur stood thunderstruck. He couldn't breathe. His world didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. It wasn't about the infidelity. The cheating was just the cherry on top of this monstrous deception. It was that the woman he was about to marry was someone else entirely. A cold, calculating, vicious predator playing a role for him, for her father, for the whole world. And he, Arthur, was just a cog in her well-thought-out plan. A convenient, obedient cog, tame, house-trained. He didn't remember escaping that hell. Vinny seemed to run up to him, saying something, shaking his shoulder, but Arthur didn't hear him. He walked along the highway at night, oblivious to the cars speeding past. Her cawing laugh and that contemptuous architect rang in his ears. He sat all night in the kitchen of their future apartment, the very place where, just hours before, he'd lovingly changed that outlet. Now everything seemed alien, fake, like his whole life. He looked at the expensive wallpaper, the new furniture, the city lights outside the window, and knew this wasn't his. It was a cage, beautiful, gilded, but a cage, and he, willingly, joyfully, had been walking into it. Blinded by the glitter, deafened by sweet talk, he'd traded himself, his essence, his profession, which he truly loved, for a pretty picture, an illusion of happiness. In the morning he started acting, calmly, methodically, like deleting a failed project from a computer. First call to the wedding planner. Cancel everything. Second call Lydia's parents. He offered no explanations. The wedding is off. Apologies for any inconvenience. Her father's voice on the phone went from velvet to steel. He yelled, threatened, demanded explanations. Arthur silently hung up. Third call. Lydia. She didn't pick up, probably still asleep after her wild night. He sent a short text. It's over. Don't look for me. Then he packed a suitcase. Took only the essentials. Some clothes, documents, a few favorite books, and his father's old drafting set in a worn leather case. Everything else, gifts, expensive clothes, anything tied to Lydia, he left behind. He walked out of the apartment, leaving the key on the hall table. At the train station, he bought a ticket for the first departing train going nowhere. That nowhere turned out to be Ashwood, And so now he sat here in his shabby little room, sifting through those memories like old faded photographs. Did he regret it? No. Did it hurt? Yes. But it was a strange, cleansing pain, like pulling out a splinter that had been festering inside, poisoning his blood. He'd lost everything: fiancé, apartment, job, status. But in return, he'd gained something far more important. He'd found himself. That Arthur Stone who once dreamed of building beautiful functional homes for ordinary people, not catering to the whims of wealthy snobs. The one who could tell truth from lies and love from a profitable transaction. The landlady, Aunt Patty, a heavy-set woman with kind but curious eyes, sometimes tried to draw him out. "Sweetheart, why so gloomy all the time? Young, good-looking, walking around like you lost your last friend. Girlfriend dump you?" Arthur smiled faintly to himself. If only it were that simple. "Something like that, Aunt Patty," he'd reply. "Ah, life happens," she'd nod knowingly. "Women, you know. Love you today, find someone else tomorrow. Don't fret, you'll find a good, simple girl. Not like those city airheads." Arthur stayed silent. He didn't know if he'd find anyone. He didn't know anything about his future. But for the first time in ages, that didn't scare him. He lived one day at a time. Woke up, went to work, hauled sacks, returned to his room, read. Sometimes in the evenings he'd take the drafting set from the suitcase, grab a sheet of paper and start sketching. He drew little cozy houses with tiled roofs and ivy-covered porches, the kind you'd want to live in, raise kids in, grow old in. He didn't know if he'd ever build one, but the process itself brought him peace. Sometimes he dreamed of Lydia, not the real one, with the predatory smile, but the one he'd invented. Perfect, gentle, loving. He'd wake in a cold sweat, heart pounding with phantom pain for the lost dream. But then he'd look out the window at the grey Ashwood dawn, hear the train whistle, smell the dampness and cheap tobacco smoke drifting from the hallway, and know this unlovely, rough reality was 1,000 times better than the beautiful lie he'd almost drowned in. He didn't know how long his life in Ashwood would last. Maybe he'd leave in a month, maybe stay forever, become the local eccentric, the ex-architect who drew little houses at night and talked to himself. But he knew one thing for certain: he'd never let anyone turn him into a tame, house-trained cog again. He'd just be Arthur, a man who accidentally saw the truth one day and found the strength not to look away, and that simple, unadorned truth was worth more than all the apartments, careers, and perfect fiancés in the world. He finished his cold coffee, pulled on his work jacket, and left the room. Ahead lay another long grey but honest day. Day followed day, and the grey watercolour of Ashwood life gradually became Arthur's familiar backdrop. He learned to find a peculiar charm in this monotony, the charm of simplicity, the charm of not having to pretend, to fit in, to play a role. At the warehouse, he was considered one of them now, the quiet, gloomy guy who worked like two men and never complained. The warehouse guys, simple and weathered like the bricks they loaded, respected him with a silent, masculine respect. They didn't pry, didn't ask unnecessary questions. Everyone here had their own story, their own skeleton in the closet, their own Ashwood in their fate. Sometimes during lunch break he'd sit on stacks of tar paper smelling of asphalt and dust and listen to their simple conversations about wives, kids, leaky roofs, potato prices. And in those talks there was more real life than in all the high society chatter he'd heard in recent years. He stopped feeling like a fugitive. He was just living here and now. One day an old battered pickup truck from the local building coupe, Haven Builders, pulled up to the warehouse. At the wheel sat a sturdy, silver-haired man in his 60s with a face like a baked apple, all wrinkles, but kind. His name was Stephen Matthews. He'd come for cement and shingles. Arthur, as usual, started loading sacks silently and efficiently. "Son, you work like a machine," Stephen Matthews said with an approving grunt, watching him. "Hands like they're made for it." Arthur just shrugged. "You're not from around here, are ya?" The old man persisted. "Accent's not Ashwood, not local," Arthur answered curtly. "Well, figures. Folks around here are simpler. You got..." Something about you, even in that grubby coverall." Arthur didn't reply, but the words stuck. Something about you. He smiled wryly to himself. Some pedigree. A runaway, a handy man, a man with no future. A few days later, the Haven Builders pickup was back. This time, a girl sat beside Stephen Matthews. She jumped out of the cab, not tall, slim, in simple jeans and a flannel shirt. Hair the color of ripe wheat was pulled back in a messy bun, with stray strands escaping. Not a beauty in Lydia's glossy sense. A simple face, freckles dusting her nose, but her eyes. Her eyes were astonishing, serious, attentive, the color of strong brewed tea. "Dad, I'll check the invoices," she said, her voice quiet but clear, pleasant to Arthur's ear. This was Hope, Stephen Matthews's daughter. She took a folder and started checking things quickly, consulting a notebook. Arthur loaded sacks again, but now watched her out of the corner of his eye. Her movements were efficient and confident. She didn't act like a princess. It was clear she was in her element, here on this dusty lot. A gust of wind snatched a paper from her folder. It fluttered in the air and landed right at Arthur's feet. He picked it up and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed for an instant. She looked up at him with her tea-colored eyes, and he saw them clearly for the first time. Something intelligent and slightly amused danced in their depths. "Thanks," she said simply. "You're welcome," he replied just as simply. That was all. But this brief, insignificant moment stayed with him. He compared her, Hope, to Lydia. Lydia would never have come to a building supply warehouse, and if she had, she'd have stayed in the car, terrified of ruining her $1,000 shoes. But this one was real, alive. That evening, Aunt Patty, setting a plate of steaming potatoes before him, started her usual refrain. "Artie, why you always alone? The local girls give you the eye. You act like a monk. Not thinking about girls, Aunt Patty. Youth?" She sighed. "But I'll tell you what. You should look closer. There's a girl here, not like those city fluff balls. Stephen Matthews's daughter. Hope. Gold, that one. Smart as a whip, hard worker. Helps her dad with everything. They got their own little coop. Dream of building houses for folks, real ones, warm ones. Not those glass boxes for the rich." Arthur froze, spoon in hand. Houses for folks, real, warm ones. That was what he himself had once dreamed of, before Lydia, before her father, before the gilded cage. With piercing clarity, he realized Aunt Patty was talking about the girl with the tea-colored eyes. After that talk, he found himself watching for the old pickup. Hope didn't come every time, but when she did, he caught himself working with a particular, almost showy diligence. He didn't try to talk to her, just observed from a distance. How she argued with her father about the quality of lumber, how she laughed with her head thrown back, how she frowned in concentration over documents, and each time he liked her more. There was nothing artificial about her. She was like this Ashwood October, honest, unadorned. Then something happened that turned his life upside down again, but this time it didn't break him. Instead, it started piecing the shards back together. One evening there was a timid knock at his door. Hope stood on the threshold. She wasn't wearing her work flannel, but a simple grey dress that suited her well. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. She clutched a folder. "Hello, Arthur," she said, a little shyly. "Sorry for coming so late. Can I come in?" He silently stepped aside, letting her into his cramped room. She entered, her gaze sweeping the room quickly but perceptively. It landed on the table where his sketches lay. The little houses with tiled roofs. "I'm here on business," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "We're in trouble. The man who did our blueprints, our draftsman. He's an old man, had a heart attack. And we're under deadline. We have to submit plans. A small development for young families. A local program. Without the plans. It's over. Ruin." She paused, catching her breath. Arthur looked at her, uncomprehending. "I'm sorry," he said, "but how can I help?" She looked straight at him with her honest eyes. "Aunt Patty said... She said you weren't who you seemed, that you... You're an architect, and I saw your drawings." She nodded towards the table. "Those aren't just pictures. They have soul. They have life. Help us, Arthur. Please." He felt everything tighten inside. Architect. That word, spoken with such contempt by Lydia, here in this shabby room from this simple girl, sounded like a password to his real life. He was afraid to dive back into that world that had brought him so much pain. Afraid he couldn't do it, that he wasn't an architect anymore, just Artie the handyman. I haven't practiced in a long time," he said hoarsely. "We'll pay." "Whatever you say," she rushed out, misinterpreting his hesitation. "It's not about the money." He shook his head. She looked at him, and in her gaze was a desperate hope, a faith in him he'd never seen in Lydia's eyes. Lydia had believed in his diploma, his potential, his obedience. This girl, Hope, believed in him, in his soul, which she'd glimpsed in his clumsy sketches. He surrendered. "Show me the papers," he said, surprised by his own raspy voice. They worked on the blueprints all night. Haven Builder's tiny office was in an addition to Stephen Matthews's house. It smelled of wood, old paper, and the strong coffee Hope brewed in a small pot. It was nothing like the sterile, soulless office of his former future father-in-law. Everything here was real, alive, saturated with work and dreams. Arthur plunged into the work like diving into a cold river. At first it was hard. His hands were out of practice, his thoughts tangled. But then, hour by hour, he got into the rhythm. He wasn't just fixing someone else's drawings, he was recreating. He moved walls, changed layouts, added porches and dormer windows. He made these houses the kind he'd want to live in himself. Comfortable, light-filled, human. Hope sat nearby. She didn't interfere. She watched silently, refilled his coffee, passed pencils, sometimes asked questions short, precise, to the point. She knew construction as well as her father, and she looked at him, Arthur, with such admiration, such genuine interest that he felt wings sprouting on his back. He didn't feel tired. He felt excitement, inspiration, the joy of creation, the very joy he'd buried under the wreckage of his shattered life. In the morning, Stephen Matthews peeked into the office. He looked at the paper-strewn table, at Arthur's and Hope's drawn but burning faces, then picked up a sheet with a finished elevation. He studied it silently for a long time, lips moving. Then he looked at Arthur. "Well, son." He shook his head, lost for words. "Son, you're not an architect. You're a wizard. The plans were submitted on time and accepted immediately. Haven Builders got the green light. Stephen Matthews, beaming like a new penny, offered Arthur a job. Not the handyman spot at the warehouse, but the position of chief architect for his small, proud company. Can't promise big bucks," he said honestly. "We don't cheat. We live square. But you won't go hungry. And the main thing, you'll be doing real work. For folks. Well, what do you say, wizard?" Arthur looked at Hope. She stood slightly behind her father, smiling at him with her quiet, bright smile. And in that smile was so much warmth and support, he knew he was home. Here, in this backwater Ashwood, in this tiny office, he'd finally found his place. "I say yes," he said firmly. A new life began. Tough, full of worries, but astonishingly happy. He threw himself into the work. He designed, visited construction sites, argued with foremen, chose materials. He felt needed again. Alive. His hands were still calloused, but now from pencils and the hammer he sometimes picked up to help the crew, not from cement sacks. His relationship with Hope developed slowly, carefully. They spent much time together, but mostly talked about work. Yet beneath the talk of footings and rafters, something else grew, a deep, real feeling built on respect, friendship, and shared purpose. He caught himself admiring her when she frowned over an estimate or laughed while giving orders to the crew. She was his partner, his comrade, his kindred spirit. She was his person. He almost forgot his past life. It seemed like a bad, distant dream, but the past wasn't ready to let him go. One day, While he and Hope were inspecting the foundation of the first house in their new development, a sleek black SUV with city plates pulled up to the site. A polished young man in an expensive suit got out. Arthur recognized him instantly. He was an assistant, a flunky for Lydia's father. "Arthur Stone?" the man asked with a sneering smile. "We've been looking all over for you, and here you are, in this dump, building a career, literally and figuratively." Hope tensed and stepped closer to Arthur. "What do you want?" Arthur asked coldly. "Me?" "Nothing. But I have a message for you. From Nicholas Barrington. He's a forgiving man. He's forgiven everything. He's waiting. Your spot at the firm, it's yours. Lydia Barrington misses you too." Poor thing. Ready to forget everything. The wedding can happen any time. Basically, you're being given a second chance to rejoin the civilized world. The man in the suit spoke, but Arthur wasn't looking at him. He was looking at Hope, at her anxious face, her clenched fists. He looked at the foundation of the future house where a young family would soon live. He breathed in the smell of raw earth, wood, and freedom. And he knew this wasn't a second chance. It was an offer to go back to prison, a beautiful, comfortable prison, but a prison nonetheless. He smiled, calmly, confidently. The smile of a man who knows his worth. "Tell Nicholas Barrington I appreciate the offer, but I decline." The assistant's eyebrows shot up. You're serious. You'd trade the city, your career, a beautiful fiancée. For this?" He gestured dismissively at the construction site with its mud, noise, and bustle. "Yes," Arthur said simply. "I'm trading the illusion for life. Tell him I found my place. And my fiancé?" He took Hope's hand. She flinched, and her fingers, cold with nerves, trustingly settled into his palm. She looked up at him with her tea-colored eyes, and they were filled with tears, but they were tears of happiness. The assistant stood for another moment, his lips curled in contempt, then got back in the SUV and drove off, kicking up a cloud of dust. They were left alone in the middle of the construction site, holding hands. Work buzzed around them, hammers pounded, engines growled. A new house was being born, a new life was beginning. His life. Arthur looked up at the grey ashwood sky. It no longer seemed dreary. It was high, vast, and full of promise. He didn't know what lay ahead. Would he and Hope be happy? Would they build everything they dreamed of? He didn't know, but for the first time in his life he was absolutely certain of one thing. He was where he belonged,